I should have noticed the signs sooner. They say hindsight is 20/20, but when you're in the middle of it, it's easy to convince yourself that everything's fine, that the distance creeping between you and the person you love is just a phase. Angela and I had been married for 7 years. We had our routines, our inside jokes, and the kind of familiarity that comes from knowing someone's habits as well as your own. Sure, things had cooled off a bit over the years, but that's normal, right? At least, that's what I told myself. Then she joined the GYM.at first. I didn't think much of it. She'd always been health conscious, and I figured it was just another way for her to stay active. But her workouts quickly became more than just a hobby, they became an obsession. Morning sessions before work. Evening sessions after dinner. Weekend classes that stretched longer than they should, and then there was Jeremy. The first time she mentioned him, we were sitting at the kitchen table, her phone buzzing beside her every few minutes. "Jeremy showed me a new routine today," she said casually, scrolling through her phone as she spoke. "He really knows how to push people to their limits." I looked up from my plate. "Who's Jeremy?" "My trainer," she replied with a quick smile. "The gym pairs new members with trainers to help them get started. He's been really helpful." I nodded, but something about the way she said his name stuck with me. "Sounds like he's good at what he does." "He is," she said quickly, her eyes drifting back to her phone. I noticed the faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips as she typed out a message. At the time, I brushed it off. After all, having a trainer was normal. But as the days turned into weeks, the little things began to add up: the late nights at the gym, the way she kept her phone close, the distance that seemed to grow between us with every passing day. One night, as she slipped into bed beside me, I found myself staring at the ceiling, my thoughts heavy with questions I couldn't shake. "Is everything okay between us?" I asked softly, my voice breaking the stillness of the room. Angela shifted beside me, her breath hitching slightly before she answered. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. You've been spending so much time at the gym lately. It feels like we're drifting apart." She sighed, her fingers brushing against my arm as if to reassure me. "I'm just trying to focus on myself right now, Andrew. You always said you wanted me to be happy." "I do," I replied, my voice quieter now. "I just miss the way things used to be between us." Angela didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned onto her side, her back facing me as silence settled between us like a heavy blanket. "It's just a phase," she murmured after a long pause. "Things will get back to normal soon." But as I lay there in the dark, listening to the faint sound of her breathing, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something I couldn't quite name, and deep down, I knew that whatever was happening, it wasn't just a phase. The days that followed Angela's reassurance should have eased my mind, but they didn't. Her words echoed in my head: "It's just a phase. But phases pass." This felt like something deeper, something pulling her further away with each late night at the gym. Her phone became an extension of her hand. Every buzz drew her attention like a magnet, her fingers swiping quickly before I could catch a glimpse. I tried not to dwell on it, but suspicion has a way of sinking its claws into your mind, refusing to let go. It wasn't until Thursday evening that the first real crack appeared. Angela had told me she'd be home by 7, just a quick session tonight, she'd said with a smile. But by 8:30, the house was still empty, and my calls went straight to voicemail. I paced the living room, phone in hand, resisting the urge to call again. Maybe she got caught up in a class. Maybe she stayed to chat with friends. Logical reasons buzzed through my mind, but none of them eased the knot tightening in my chest. 9:15, headlights flashed across the window, and moments later, the front door creaked open. Angela stepped inside, her cheeks flushed, her hair slightly damp from a post-workout shower. She paused when she saw me, surprise flickering across her face. "You're still up?" she asked, slipping off her shoes with deliberate care. "Yeah," I replied, keeping my voice calm despite the adrenaline humming through my veins. "I thought you'd be home earlier." Her smile was quick, but her eyes didn't quite meet mine. I lost track of time. Jeremy added some extra drills to the session tonight, really pushed us hard. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. You didn't see my calls? Angela glanced at her phone as if noticing it for the first time. Oh, I must have had it on silent. Sorry, babe. I forced a smile, but the words didn't sit right. Angela never ignored her phone. Still, I pushed the doubt aside and stepped forward, wrapping my arms around her. Her body was warm against mine, but the familiar comfort I once felt in her embrace was missing, like holding someone who was already half a world away. Everything okay? I asked quietly, my chin resting against her shoulder. Of course, she replied quickly, pulling back before I could linger too long. I'm just tired. The gym's been intense lately. You know how it is. Yeah, I murmured, though the weight in my chest only grew heavier. That night, as she slept beside me, her breath soft and steady, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The clock ticked softly on the nightstand, marking each minute that passed without answers. That I wanted to trust her. I wanted to believe that the woman I'd built my life with was still the person I thought I knew, but somewhere deep down, a voice whispered that something was slipping through my fingers, and soon, I'd have no choice but to face the truth. The following days passed in a blur of routine work, meals, conversations that skimmed the surface of what neither of us wanted to say. Angela's trips to the gym continued like clockwork, her excuses more polished with each passing day. But the distance between us had become impossible to ignore. Friday night, I decided to surprise her. She'd mentioned a late training session, and though part of me knew I was stepping into dangerous territory, I couldn't shake the need to see things for myself. Pulling into the gym parking lot, I sat behind the wheel, heart hammering as I scanned the rows of cars. My gaze caught on Angela's sleek sedan parked near the entrance. I clenched the steering wheel, inhaling slowly to steady my breath before stepping out into the crisp evening air. Inside, the gym buzzed with the hum of treadmills and the clink of weights. The air smelled faintly of sweat and rubber mats. I moved through the rows of equipment, scanning faces, searching for the one I knew better than my own, and then I saw her. Angela stood near the free weights, her posture poised as she adjusted the strap of her sports bra. Beside her, Jeremy leaned too close. His hand hovered near her shoulder, his fingers grazing her skin as he corrected her form. Their laughter drifted through the air, soft and private in a way that made my chest tighten. That I stepped back, pressing against a row of lockers to stay out of sight. My breath came in shallow bursts as I watched them, each second stretching into an eternity. Angela tilted her head back, her smile lingering as Jeremy whispered something close to her ear. Her hand briefly touched his arm, a gesture so quick, so intimate, that it sent a jolt through my chest. That I should have confronted them right then and there, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. Instead, I watched as Angela picked up a towel, her fingers brushing against Jeremy's as he passed her a water bottle. Their eyes met just for a moment, but the heat in that glance was unmistakable. Pulse roaring in my ears, I turned and made my way back to the parking lot, each step heavier than the last. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped outside, but it did little to steady the fire burning beneath my skin. By the time I reached my car, my hands trembled against the steering wheel. My thoughts spun in frantic circles. Was it just innocent flirting? Or was it more than that? I wanted to believe there was still room for doubt, but the image of their lingering touch replayed in my mind like a scene I couldn't escape, and deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. I drove home in silence, the hum of the engine the only sound breaking through the whirlwind of thoughts in my mind. My fingers clenched the steering wheel tighter than necessary, but I couldn't loosen my grip, not after what I'd seen. Angela and Jeremy too close, too familiar. The brush of their hands, the way they leaned into each other as if the world around them didn't exist. It wasn't just training. It wasn't just a gym session. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my pulse had settled into a slow, heavy rhythm, each beat echoing the words I wasn't ready to say aloud. I sat there for a moment, staring at the faint light filtering through the curtains, before finally stepping out and heading inside. The house was quiet. Angela wasn't home yet. I checked the time, 9:40 p.m. She'd said her session would end by 9. Dropping my keys on the counter, I moved to the living room and sank onto the couch, phone in hand. My thumb hovered over her contact for a moment before I opened our messages. Me, hey, you almost home? Minutes passed. No reply. My pulse picked up again as I stared at the screen. I tapped my thumb against my knee, the seconds dragging out longer than they should. Just as I was about to call, the sound of the garage door opening made me freeze. I stood as Angela stepped inside, gym bag slung over her shoulder, cheeks flushed from the cool night air or maybe something else. She paused when she saw me, her smile quick but slightly strained. Hey, babe, she said, kicking off her shoes. You're up late. Yeah, I replied, studying her carefully. Thought I'd wait up. She moved toward the kitchen, setting her bag down beside the counter. Long session tonight. Jeremy had me doing extra sets. Really pushed me. I stepped closer, heart hammering in my chest as I searched her face for any trace of guilt. Must have been intense. You're home later than usual. Angela paused, fingers brushing the strap of her bag as if considering her next words. Yeah, we ran over a bit. Then I stayed to stretch and cool down. Her phone buzzed from inside the gym bag. She glanced at it quickly, too quickly before pulling the zipper closed. I stepped forward, my pulse spiking as I forced my voice to remain calm. Who was that? Just one of the girls from the gym, she replied without hesitation, her smile a little too easy. I held her gaze, searching for cracks in the carefully constructed facade. Mind if I see? Angela's smile faltered, just for a second. Seriously, Andrew? Don't you trust me? Of course I do, I replied, though the words felt hollow. I just feel like you've been distant lately. I want to understand what's going on. There's nothing going on, she said quickly, her voice sharp with a hint of defensiveness. I've just been focused on my fitness. I thought you'd be proud of me. I am, I said, stepping closer. But I also feel like you're keeping something from me. Ever since you started training with Jeremy, things have felt different. Angela's eyes flashed with something anger, maybe, or something she didn't want me to see. You're imagining things, Andrew. Jeremy's just my trainer. That's it. The words hung between us, heavy with unspoken tension. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust the woman I'd built my life with. But the image of her with Jeremy, their lingering glances, the brush of their hands burned in my mind like a truth I couldn't ignore. I hope you're right, I said quietly. Because I don't know how much longer I can live with this doubt. Angela's breath hitched slightly, but she said nothing. Instead, she grabbed her gym bag and disappeared down the hallway, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen, heart pounding with the weight of what I feared was still to come. Angela's footsteps faded down the hallway, leaving me standing in the kitchen with my thoughts spinning. Her quick smile, the too easy explanations, none of it sat right. I stared at her gym bag, still zipped shut beside the counter, my pulse drumming steadily in my ears. I stepped closer, fingers brushing the bag strap before I hesitated. The urge to unzip it, to see the messages she'd hidden, burned in my chest. But before I could decide, her phone buzzed again, muffled but unmistakable. Footsteps approached, and I stepped back just as Angela reappeared. Her eyes flicked to the bag, then to me. Still up? She asked lightly, though tension clung to her words. Just thinking, I replied, my voice calm despite the storm brewing beneath my skin. Long night for both of us, I guess. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Yeah. I'm gonna shower. As she disappeared into the bathroom, I exhaled slowly, fists clenching at my sides. The lie had been easy for her, too easy, but the truth wouldn't stay hidden for long. The next morning, the air between Angela and me felt heavier than ever. She moved through the kitchen with her usual grace, pouring coffee and checking her phone with quick, guarded glances. I watched her from across the room, my pulse steady despite the questions hammering beneath the surface. Busy day at the gym tonight? I asked casually. She glanced up, her smile quick but strained. Yeah, Jeremy's got us doing circuit training. should be intense. His name again, always his name. That I nodded slowly, sipping my coffee. Mind if I stop by after work? Thought I'd check the place out, maybe join myself. Angela froze mid-sip, her eyes flicking to mine. You? At the gym? She forced a laugh. I thought weights weren't your thing. Maybe it's time for a change, I replied, holding her gaze. For a moment, her smile faltered just enough for doubt to flicker in her eyes. But she recovered quickly, brushing past me to grab her keys. Suit yourself, she said lightly. I've gotta run. See you tonight? Yeah, I replied, though the words felt hollow. As the door closed behind her, I set down my mug and inhaled slowly. Tonight, I'd get the answers I needed. No more lies. That evening, I drove to the gym with my pulse hammering in my chest. Angela hadn't texted since she left for her session, something that only added fuel to the fire burning beneath my skin. Pulling into the parking lot, I scanned the rows of cars until my gaze landed on her sedan parked near the entrance. Stepping inside, the air buzzed with the hum of treadmills and the rhythmic clang of weights. The faint scent of sweat and rubber mats clung to the air as I moved past the front desk, eyes scanning the crowd. My heart pounded harder with each step as I searched for her. Then I spotted them. Angela stood near the squat rack, her form tense as she adjusted the weight bar. Beside her, Jeremy leaned too close, his hand brushing her lower back as he whispered something in her ear. She laughed, the sound soft and intimate in a way that made my stomach twist. I clenched my fists, stepping forward before I could second-guess myself. My pulse roared in my ears as I approached, each step heavier than the last. Angela noticed me first, her eyes widening with a flash of something that looked like panic before she quickly masked it with a smile. Andrew, she called, her voice too bright, too forced. What are you doing here? Jeremy turned, his gaze calm and appraising as he sized me up. Thought I'd check out the gym, I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. My eyes flicked between them, searching their faces for the truth I already knew. Cool, Jeremy said with a nod, his smile easy but guarded. I'm Jeremy, Angela's trainer. I met his gaze without flinching. Yeah, I've heard. Silence hung between us for a beat too long before Angela cleared her throat. Jeremy was just helping me with my form, she said quickly, stepping back from the squat rack. Looked like more than that, I replied, my voice lower now. Her smile faltered. Don't start, Andrew. Not here. Jeremy glanced between us, then clapped his hands together. I'll give you 2 a minute. Angela, we'll pick up where we left off in 5. With that, he stepped away, leaving us standing alone near the equipment. I stepped closer, my pulse pounding in my ears. I saw the way he touched you. Angela's eyes flashed with something sharp, defensiveness or guilt, I couldn't tell. It's part of training, Andrew. Don't turn this into something it's not. Then why did you look so nervous when you saw me? I shot back. She crossed her arms, her posture stiff. Because I knew you'd react like this. You're always so suspicious lately, because you've given me reasons to be. I cut her off. The late nights. The messages you hide. The way you pull away every time I try to get close. Angela's breath hitched, but she quickly masked it with a scoff. You're imagining things. No, I said, stepping closer until our eyes locked. I'm seeing things clearly for the first time. Her gaze flicked toward the weight rack, anywhere but at me. But before she could find the words to push me away, I stepped back, pulse steady despite the fire burning beneath my skin. This isn't over, Angela, I said quietly. Not by a long shot. I turned and walked away before she could respond, each step echoing in my chest like the countdown to something I couldn't stop, because I knew the truth was only a breath away, and soon, she wouldn't be able to deny it anymore. I drove home with my thoughts spinning faster than the tires against the pavement. The image of Angela and Jeremy too close, too familiar burned in my mind like a scene I couldn't escape. Her smile when she saw me, the flicker of panic in her eyes, the quick defensiveness, it all pointed to one truth I wasn't ready to say aloud. By the time I stepped into the house, the air inside felt heavier than usual. The faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant tick of the clock were the only sounds that greeted me as I dropped my keys on the counter and leaned against the edge, inhaling slowly to steady my pulse. Minutes later, the front door clicked open. Angela stepped inside, her gym bag slung over her shoulder and her smile carefully composed. "You left pretty quickly," she said, her tone light but cautious. "I saw what I needed to see," I replied without turning around. She set her bag down with a faint thud, her footsteps soft as she approached. "Andrew, come on. You're blowing this out of proportion. Jeremy's my trainer, that's all." I turned to face her, pulse steady but heavy in my chest. "Then why do you always look so nervous when I bring him up?" Angela's smile wavered, just for a moment. "Because you're always accusing me of something that isn't true. It's exhausting, Andrew." "No," I said, my voice low and firm. "What's exhausting is pretending I don't notice the way you pull away every time I get close. The late nights, the texts you don't want me to see, the way you look at him." Her eyes flicked toward the floor, and for a moment, the air between us felt thick enough to drown in. "You're imagining things," she murmured, but the words lacked conviction. I stepped closer, my pulse hammering in my chest. "Am I? Then prove it. Let me see your phone." Angela's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with something between anger and fear. "No," she said quickly, her hand instinctively moving toward her pocket. "That's my private space, Andrew. You don't get to invade it just because you're feeling insecure." "Insecure?" I echoed, my voice rising despite my best efforts. "I wouldn't have to wonder if you hadn't been lying to me for weeks." "What are you hiding, Angela?" "I'm not hiding anything," she shot back, her voice sharp enough to cut through the air between us. "Then show me." I stepped forward, holding out my hand. "No." The word burst from her lips with enough force to make me pause. Her breath came in quick, shallow bursts as she clutched her phone tightly against her chest, as if the device itself held the key to everything she didn't want me to see. We stood there, locked in a standoff of unspoken truths and words we couldn't take back. The air between us crackled with tension, heavy with everything that had been building between us for weeks. Finally, Angela stepped back, shaking her head as if trying to clear the air between us. "I'm not doing this with you," she said, her voice brittle. "I'm going to shower." Without another word, she turned and disappeared down the hallway, leaving me standing alone in the silence she'd left behind. As the sound of running water echoed through the house, I exhaled slowly, my hands trembling at my sides. The walls were closing in, and soon, there would be nowhere left for her to hide. Angela's footsteps faded down the hallway, the sound of the bathroom door closing echoing through the house. My pulse pounded in my ears as I stood motionless in the kitchen, her refusal playing over and over in my mind. "No." One word, sharp and final, but beneath it, I'd heard something more: fear. Without thinking, I stepped toward her gym bag still resting by the counter. My hands trembled slightly as I unzipped the top and reached inside. The faint scent of sweat and shampoo clung to the fabric, but I ignored it as I searched through the compartments. Water ran faintly from the bathroom as I found what I was looking for: her phone charger tangled beneath a spare sports bra and a small towel. I exhaled slowly, setting it aside as I continued my search. My fingers brushed against a folded piece of paper tucked into the side pocket. Heart hammering, I pulled it out and unfolded it with care. My breath caught. It was a receipt from a boutique hotel just outside town. The date stamped at the top was from 2 weeks ago, on a night Angela had claimed she'd stayed late at the gym. The room number was scribbled at the bottom in quick, careless handwriting. My chest tightened as I stared at the slip of paper in my hands. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was proof. The water shut off abruptly, and panic shot through me as I quickly folded the receipt and stuffed it back into the bag. My breath came shallow as I zipped the bag closed and stepped back just as the bathroom door creaked open. Angela stepped into the hallway wrapped in a towel, droplets of water clinging to her shoulders as she paused at the sight of me still standing by the counter. Her gaze flicked briefly to her gym bag before meeting mine. "What are you still doing up?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. "Thinking," I replied, pulse still racing in my chest. She hesitated, her eyes scanning my face as if searching for something unsaid. "About what?" I swallowed the lump rising in my throat, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Us." Angela's smile was faint but guarded. "Andrew, we've been over this. There's nothing going on. You need to trust me." "Do I?" I stepped forward, holding her gaze with more intensity than I intended. "Because right now, I don't know what to believe." Her smile faltered. "You're imagining things. Jeremy's just my trainer." I inhaled slowly, fists clenching at my sides as the weight of the receipt burned in my mind. "Then why are you lying to me, Angela?" "I'm not lying." "Stop," I cut her off, my voice sharp enough to make her freeze. "Stop pretending everything's fine. I know something's going on. The late nights, the messages, the way you look at him. It's not just training. So tell me the truth." Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Angela's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Her towel shifted slightly against her collarbone as her breath hitched. "Andrew, you're making this into something it's not," she whispered, but the cracks in her voice betrayed her confidence. That I stepped closer, my pulse steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Then tell me what it is." For a moment, I thought she might break, that the truth would finally spill from her lips. But instead, she stepped back, clutching the towel tighter around herself as her gaze hardened. "I don't have to explain myself to you," she said quietly. "I'm tired of being accused of something I haven't done." I stared at her, searching for the woman I thought I knew beneath the walls she'd built between us. But all I saw was someone I no longer recognized. "Maybe not," I replied, my voice low. "But sooner or later, the truth's going to come out. And when it does, there won't be any more excuses." Angela's breath hitched, but she said nothing as she turned and disappeared into the bedroom, leaving me standing alone in the silence that followed. As the door clicked shut behind her, I exhaled slowly, my fists unclenching at my sides. The breaking point had come. Now, there was no going back. Sleep never came that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling as Angela's words echoed in my mind. "I'm not lying." But the hotel receipt burned in my thoughts like a brand I couldn't erase. It was proof, tangible and undeniable. Yet still, she denied everything. By morning, the air between us felt heavier than ever. Angela moved through the house with deliberate care, her smile thin and fragile, as if the walls might crack beneath the weight of what neither of us was saying. I watched her from the doorway as she poured coffee, her phone clutched tightly in her hand as if she couldn't bear to part with it. "Heading to the gym again tonight?" I asked, keeping my tone calm despite the fire burning beneath my skin. She glanced up quickly, her smile slipping for just a moment before she caught herself. "Yeah, Jeremy's got us doing endurance training. Should be a tough one." "His name again?" "Always his name." I nodded slowly, stepping into the kitchen and leaning against the counter. "Mind if I swing by again? Maybe we could grab dinner after." Angela froze mid-sip, her eyes flicking to mine with a flicker of something too quick to name. I'm not sure how long I'll be. Might be late again." "Then I'll wait," I replied, pulse quickening as I watched her reaction. Her smile returned, but the warmth didn't reach her eyes. "Andrew, you don't have to keep checking up on me. It's just a gym session." "Then what are you so worried about?" The question hung between us, heavy with the weight of everything we hadn't said. Angela's fingers curled tighter around the coffee mug as she stepped back, her gaze shifting toward the window as if searching for an escape. "I'm not worried," she said carefully. "I just don't like feeling watched. I wouldn't have to watch if you'd just tell me the truth." Her breath hitched, but she masked it with a quick laugh that didn't match the tension in her eyes. "Andrew, this is getting ridiculous." "Is it?" I stepped closer, pulse hammering against my ribs. "Because I found the receipt, Angela. From the hotel." Her eyes snapped to mine, all color draining from her face. For the first time in weeks, the mask slipped, and I saw the truth beneath the carefully rehearsed lies. She started to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Her fingers trembled against the mug, and for a moment, I thought she might drop it. "Tell me the truth," I demanded, voice low and rough with the weight of everything I hadn't said. "No more lies. No more excuses. Just tell me." Angela's breath came shallow and uneven, her chest rising and falling as she searched my face for something she couldn't find. "Andrew." The words faltered again, and I stepped closer, closing the distance between us until only a breath of space separated us. "Was it Jeremy?" I asked, the question ripping from my chest like a wound torn open. Angela's lips parted, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. The air seemed to leave the room all at once. My pulse slowed, heavy and deliberate, as the weight of her confession settled over me like a stone. "How long?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fire burning beneath my skin. "A few months," she admitted, her voice barely audible. I stepped back, the distance between us suddenly too small, too suffocating. My hands clenched at my sides as the walls of the kitchen seemed to close in around me. "Why?" The word slipped from my lips before I could stop it. "I don't know," she whispered, tears spilling over her cheeks. "At first, it was just training, but then I couldn't stop. I didn't mean to hurt you, but you did." My voice cut through hers, sharp and final. "Every night you lied. Every time you chose him instead of coming home. You made that choice." Silence fell heavy and thick between us, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of the clock. Finally, I exhaled slowly, my pulse steadying as I stepped back toward the hallway. "I can't do this anymore, Angela," I said quietly. "I deserve better than this." Her breath hitched as she stepped forward, eyes pleading as she reached for my hand. But I pulled back before she could touch me. Without another word, I turned and walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoing through the silence she'd left behind. The final thread had snapped. Now, all that remained was deciding how to move forward. Angela stood frozen in the kitchen, her breath uneven as I stepped away from her. Her confession echoed in my mind. "I didn't mean to hurt you." But the damage was done. I paused at the bedroom door, pulse still hammering in my chest. "How many times?" I asked without turning around. "Andrew, please, how many?" Silence. Then, a whisper, "More than once." My breath hitched, but I forced myself to stay calm. "That's all I needed to know." Angela's sobs broke the silence as I stepped into the bedroom, closing the door softly behind me. This was the beginning of the end. Morning light filtered through the curtains, casting faint shadows across the bedroom walls. I sat on the edge of the bed, my pulse steady but heavy as the weight of Angela's confession settled deeper into my chest. From the kitchen, I could hear faint sounds: clinking dishes, the hum of the coffee maker, but the air between us felt like a wall neither of us could break through. I ran a hand through my hair, inhaling slowly as I gathered my thoughts. When I stepped into the hallway, Angela stood by the counter, her eyes red from a night of broken sleep. She looked up as I approached, her fingers tightening around her coffee mug as if holding it together might keep her from falling apart. "Andrew," she began, but her voice cracked before she could finish. I held up a hand, stopping her before she could continue. "I don't need an explanation," I said quietly. "I just need to know if it's over." She hesitated just long enough for the answer to settle in my chest. "I don't know," she whispered. The final thread snapped. Without another word, I turned and stepped past her, each step toward the front door feeling heavier than the last. Some distances can't be closed. The silence between Angela and me stretched longer with each passing day. We moved through the house like strangers, two people tethered by memories but separated by choices that couldn't be undone. I caught her watching me sometimes, her eyes pleading for a conversation I no longer had the energy to give. That evening, I sat on the couch, my suitcase half-packed beside me. The sound of her footsteps approached, slow and uncertain. She paused in the doorway, clutching the edge as if holding herself upright. "Are you really leaving?" she asked, her voice soft but strained. I looked up, meeting her gaze with a calmness I hadn't felt in weeks. "I have to," I replied. "Staying here, pretending we can fix this, it's not fair to either of us." Tears welled in her eyes, but she said nothing. The weight of unspoken apologies and shattered trust filled the air between us. Without another word, I returned to packing because sometimes, the only way forward is to leave the past behind. The suitcase sat by the front door, packed and ready. Angela stood across the room, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if bracing against the inevitable. The silence between us felt heavier than any argument could have been. "Is there anything I can say to make you stay?" she asked, her voice trembling that I met her gaze, my pulse steady despite the ache in my chest. "No," I replied softly. "Some things can't be undone, Angela. We both know that." Tears slipped down her cheeks as she took a step forward, but I raised a hand to stop her. "I need to do this for both of us." She nodded slowly, her breath hitching as she stepped back. Without another word, I picked up the suitcase, the weight of it nothing compared to the weight of what I was leaving behind. That I paused at the door, taking one last look at the life we'd built and the love we'd lost. "Goodbye, Angela." The door closed softly behind me, and I stepped into the night without looking back. The night air clung to my skin as I stepped off the porch, the distant hum of traffic blending with the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. My suitcase, packed with the essentials of a life now left behind, sat heavy in my hand but not as heavy as the weight pressing against my chest. Each step toward the car echoed with the finality of what I was leaving behind. That I paused beside the driver's side door, fingers resting on the handle as I stared back at the house that had once been our home. Warm light spilled from the windows, soft and inviting, but it no longer felt like a place I belonged. Behind the curtain, I could see the faint silhouette of Angela standing motionless, her head bowed as if the air inside was just as heavy as the air outside. Memories flickered through my mind in sharp, vivid bursts, the sound of her laughter echoing through the kitchen, the warmth of her hand in mine on winter mornings, the whispered promises of forever beneath the covers. But those moments were ghosts now, fragments of a love that had unraveled thread by thread until all that remained were the lies that tore us apart. That I took a slow, steady breath, the air cool and sharp against my lungs. The ache in my chest tightened, but beneath it, something new began to stir, something lighter, freer. I'd clung to the hope that we could repair what was broken, but hope couldn't erase the nights she'd spent with Jeremy or the look in her eyes when she'd finally confessed the truth. Sliding into the driver's seat, I set the suitcase on the passenger side and gripped the steering wheel, my pulse steadying with the hum of the engine beneath my fingertips. The faint warmth of the heater brushed against my skin as I stared through the windshield, the empty road stretching ahead like a blank page waiting to be written. For a moment, doubt whispered through my mind. Was I making the right choice? Should I have stayed? Tried harder? Forgiven her? But then I remembered the late nights, the lies disguised as reassurance, and the way her smile had shifted when she spoke his name. No. Some betrayals couldn't be undone. Some wounds ran too deep to heal. As I shifted the car into drive, I glanced back at the house one last time. Angela still stood by the window, her silhouette unmoving as if waiting for something that wouldn't come. Our eyes met through the glass, just a fleeting moment, a silent goodbye shared without words. I pressed my foot to the gas, the tires rolling softly over the pavement as the house faded into the rearview mirror. The streetlights cast long shadows across the road, each one passing like a marker of the distance growing between us. With every mile, the knot in my chest began to loosen, the air in my lungs feeling just a little bit lighter. Memories continued to swirl in my mind, but they no longer held me captive. I'd given everything to a love that couldn't stand the weight of truth, but now I had a chance to rebuild. To move forward without the burden of wondering what lies lurked behind every smile and late-night text. As the city lights faded behind me and the open road stretched into the horizon, a sense of calm settled over my shoulders. The future was uncertain, the path ahead uncharted, but for the first time in a long time, I felt the spark of possibility stirring in my chest. Gripping the steering wheel a little tighter, I exhaled slowly and whispered to myself, "This is not the end. This is the beginning." And I didn't look back.